Is there any space for victory over sin in the doctrine of righteousness by faith? Some people would say, well, if we're saved by faith, then our behavior doesn't matter, and so we don't talk about the importance of living a victorious Christian life. But once again, nothing could be further from the truth of the gospel. We have wonderful promises in Paul's writings that tell us that victory over sin is important and it's also possible, but not by our strength, but by God's grace itself. For example, in his letter to the Romans in chapter 5, Paul says in verse 16, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." That's a promise. That when the grace of God comes into our lives, we learn to trust and to lean upon Him, to trust in the power of the Spirit, that we don't have to be shackled to the sins that so easily beset us, but we can know the victory that Christ can give us, not because of our own strength, certainly, because Christ Himself has defeated the power of sin and death, and that means that sin no longer has to reign in our lives. In fact, that word reign is really an important one. We find this in Paul's letter to the Romans, Romans chapter 6. Paul says that when we come to the truth of the gospel in Jesus Christ, he says that we're not supposed to let sin reign in our mortal bodies. And that means that when we come to Christ, sin is dethroned from the throne of our hearts, and now grace reigns. And therefore, sin should not be the dominating force that enslaves us. It doesn't mean we don't make mistakes along life's path, when the devil tricks us or we make mistakes, but it means that sin no longer has to be the dominating presence that makes us do its bidding, because Christ has set us free. Paul knew that good news, and he wanted the believers in Galatia to recognize that. And so he told them, if we rely on the Spirit, if we walk in the Spirit, we don't have to be a slave to the sins of the flesh. I hope you'll experience that freedom, because there's no better freedom than knowing the freedom that comes with knowing Christ.